This episode of the EV Resource Podcast is brought to you by Titan Auto and Tire. Titan has some of the very few independent auto repair shops in Central Virginia that are qualified to work on EVs and hybrids. And from hybrids to Hummers, they fix everything. For more information and to schedule an appointment for your vehicle, go to TitanAutoTire.com. Coming up this week,
how long does it take to charge? and
yeah,
because
boy, is that a loaded question.
Yeah, right. So, and there's so many different pieces that can come into play around that. And what we found quickly is if you promise someone a kilowatt in our research, we found if you say this, it's 150 kilowatt. The expectation from any driver is that is going to be 150 kilowatts. Yeah, that's what I'm getting. And if they don't know what their car can accept, or if they're at a higher state of charge and they don't get 150, consumers will, if they get 146, they'll be like, is there something wrong with the charger?
Well, hello, friends, and welcome to episode 160 of the EV Resource Podcast. I'm Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and interviews with industry experts. And this week, I have a very special conversation to share with you. I sat down with Matt Teske, founder and CEO of Chargeway, and we talk about simplifying the conversation around EV charging so that even somebody who is brand new to the EV ownership experience can very easily understand the capabilities of their car, but more importantly, how it relates to charging stations that they are looking for when they're out of the house. And the reason behind this is to increase EV adoption and make the consumer experience as easy and simple as possible. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you Matt Teske, founder and CEO of Chargeway. Well, Matt, I want to thank you for taking the time today to sit down with me and talk about Chargeway. I don't believe a lot of people know about the company and about what you guys are doing, but before we dive into all of that, I really want to talk about the complexity of fast charging, specifically when it comes to EVs and the general lack of knowledge. Not for anybody's fault. There's nobody out there really teaching people about fast charging. There are issues when it comes to what people are trying to do. So I want to highlight that. I really want to focus on the problem and then kind of get to what the solution, or at least your solution, Chargeway's solution, what that is. I've looked around. I've considered lots of different potential solutions, and I genuinely believe that you guys have hit the nail on the head and have exactly what needs to be adopted widely across the industry. Before we jump into all of that, though, I really want to give you a chance to just introduce yourself a little bit further and talk about the reasoning behind why you got into this and what pushes you every single day.
Well, yeah, first, thanks for having me. As we discussed before we started recording, we thought we had done this before. Why hadn't we? So it's good to see you, and thanks again. So no, as for my background and myself and why I got into this, it was, well, number one, I'm a car guy, and from being a little kid, I was a car guy, and really that's how my world has kind of revolved around cars when I was a kid, and got into high school, had a car that I started modifying. I mean, think Fast and the Furious. That was my world back, 25 years ago now. And it just sort of progressed into being an automotive enthusiast. And over time, that was really all I focused on. But there was always this voice in the back of my head. And I grew up in Southern California, where you could basically have days where you couldn't see the mountains because of the smog. And as a kid, that bothered me. And I had this kind of like dual interest. I wanted to be working on cars because I thought they were fun, but I had this passion of we got to be doing a better job of how we use the planet and use resources. And it took a long time, but finally when EVs, I was following with the EV conversation for decades essentially while I was working in the automotive world, and finally decided, okay, I'm going to get my first EV. This is now going on 10 years ago now, and it was a very interesting thing because it was walking away from what I'd done with my career with a lot of passionate automotive people who were looking at EVs like they were just this foreign thing. But I was like, I want to dive in on this finally. And so my wife and I, we got a Chevrolet Volt V Victor, because if you say it too fast, people don't know which car you're talking about sometimes. And we bought it. I was excited, and we took it on our first road trip. And I called the resort we're staying at. And I just called Advance saying, hey, do you guys have charging stations? And they said, yeah, no problem. You can plug in. I thought, this is so simple. This is great.
I can only guess where you're going with this.
Oh, it was the inception of Chargeway based on just an experience. And what happened is we showed up and we're checking in. And I said, oh, by the way, I called Advance. We have an EV, wanted to plug it in. Where are your charging stations? And the woman behind the counter kind of looked around and said, oh, I have to get Tom, the maintenance guy or something. And I went, what? And she literally made a phone call, and some guy walks up with a tool belt and everything and said, follow me. And he walks us out, and we're leaving our bags like at the counter, and we walk out past our car, past every car in the parking lot, and there's a wooden shed at the edge of the parking lot, and we're walking toward it, and I'm thinking, what is going on? And we get there, he leans over and flips open a little metal flap, with the little 110 outlet, and goes, there you go, buddy. That's where there you go. And I went, no, that's not a charging station. And so in that moment, my wife's kind of looking at me, like this very just kind of what's going on. And I'm embarrassed. And that night at dinner, my wife says to me, she said, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. She said, you're a car guy, right? And I went, yeah, well, I thought I was, but I said, what? Yeah, well, okay, what's your point? She said, no, I'm not trying to be mean, but honestly, how would I do this? Like, you couldn't figure this out. How would I do this? And I thought, yeah, that's a very valid question, because I was the guy that did all the research. I learned about EVs. I was like, I know I want this car, because I was passionate about the fact that it was an EV, not just a mode of transportation. And I thought, did I really get this wrong? And I then dove into the research. And what I quickly realized was, to the average person, to EV enthusiasts and early adopters, we all wanted to learn this stuff, and we were passionate about learning it. And that's part of what's driven the industry to where it is right now. But to have that translate to the mainstream marketplace, to the general public, they're not thinking like we did. And I quickly realized, we're not asking people to buy a new car. We're really asking them to buy into a new fuel type. And that's really the challenge, and I never thought of it that way, but then I thought about, okay, well, what has my experience in my career been? And I realized, well, I can take my experience with automotive, which also included branding and marketing and communication strategy for automotive aftermarket companies, OEMs. And I thought, how do I translate that enthusiasm for a specialty vehicle into a new fuel type? Can I figure that out? And what's the challenge for how to communicate it? And I quickly realized that we're trying to take a bunch of engineering terminology and hand it to the public and say, hey, you'll figure it out. And the answer is only if they care. Because there's an incumbent product that they've used for decades that is a liquid. It takes 10 minutes and they can call it regular, and it's everywhere. And so that's the benchmark. Like, how do we make it that easy to understand? Otherwise, it's going to be too hard. And I just dove into the research and found very quickly that we had to figure out how to give people an understanding of how their EV experience would work. Not, here is charging, go figure it out, but instead, here's what your landscape of your EV ownership experience will look like. And that translated into, there's multiple plug types, and there's multiple power levels at stations, and also how power can be accepted by a car, all the amps and volts in the background of how that works to give you a maximum kilowatt. And I thought, we have got to get this down to something simple that average people can navigate and then understand what their experience will be, which is, can I connect there? That's color. And then how long do I have to wait? That's based on power of either what the car can accept or what the station's providing you. At a baseline, we have to start there to introduce them into the experience of charging.
I can't tell you how many times I have been charging and I'll see somebody pull in, and typically, like, I'll use Electrify America because they are very prominent, and a lot of their stations have different power levels at the same station. So, for example, here in Richmond, they've got, I believe it's 8 stalls, and 2 of them are 350 kilowatt, and the rest are 150 kilowatt, with the exception of the Chatamo, which is way at the end at 50 kilowatt. So I can't tell you how many times I've seen people either try to use the Chatamo, because that has typically been remaining open, on a CCS car, or they're in their Chevy Bolt and they plug into the 350, even when others are open, because, well, 350 is more, it's better.
Yeah.
Okay. 350 is a higher number, but the missing link is people have no idea what their car is capable of and how that relates to what they're plugging into. And it's a problem that I don't anticipate getting better without simple, easy to consume education, because the people, to your point, that are adopting electric vehicles now are not the early adopters. They're not the ones that are excited about the technology and new things, and they want to learn all of that like you or I would be. These are now people that are buying an electric car for other reasons. They're buying a car that suits their needs that happens to be electric. So there's a slight nuance there.
Yeah, we're turning that corner into that early majority type world.
Mhm.
And if you look at the typical adoption curve graphs you can find anywhere on Google, that's that bridging of the chasm between the early adopters and the early majority.
Yes.
And what's happening is, to your point, we now have a lot of compelling EVs that are coming to market from automakers that people have loved those brands for years. They'll say,
Yes.
I've always been a Ford person, or I've always been a BMW person. And they are now having the option to go electric with these brands. The difficulty is the automakers and the dealers, they've never had to explain how to fill up. They never had to. So and if you rewind even 5 years, when you look at when certain EVs were coming to market, like the Chevrolet Bolt, for example, when it was unveiled, it was a huge to do. Look what Chevy brought to market so fast. And when Mary Barra was asked in that moment, what's your plan for EV infrastructure, for charging, and how to explain it? And in that
They
moment,
didn't
and
have
see,
one.
she at that time she said, "That's not what we do. Like that's not even our job. We don't care." And not that she said it that like she didn't
Right.
care, but she said that's not what we
Paraphrasing.
do. Paraphrasing, but she's like, "That's not what we do. Someone else, another industry, or other companies, stakeholders will take care of that." And that is how they felt, and they quickly realized, wait, we can't be that disconnected. So then it turns into, do we actually do what companies like Tesla have done, where we actually own the charging and we build it out in a way that we are controlling it? Or do we partner with third party networks that have enough of a footprint that we can kind of cobble together what appears to be a network? And
Right.
then we slap our marketing team on it and call it Blue Oval or
Yeah.
Ultium 360.
Right.
And it's with again, and that's again, credit to the automakers. They know how to create storytelling that way. But if the customer experience doesn't reflect something that actually is what they're saying, then quickly that story starts to fall apart. And so I think that what we're at the beginning of this conversation. I mean, we really truly are, based on the fact that we're still this wild west of how it works. We still have multiple plug types, we still have multiple power levels, the station designs are all different, how they're deployed is different, how you pay for it is different. So what our goal with Chargeway was to say, if we know all that chaos is there, there has to be some sort of a wayfinding system within that chaos. Because if you just slap a name on something like, again, Blue Oval or Ultium 360, or frankly, if you try to differentiate charging options using like lingo that sounds buzzy, like hyper or super or ultra or extreme, it might sound good in a press release and it might sound fun to say, but does it actually, to your point, help people understand how it works? No, they will still look at it and say, well, then wait, which one's more, hyper or ultra or extreme, or like what order does that go in? You know, and if that's what we want people to learn, we shouldn't be trying to come up with kitschy, like catchphrases. We should be saying, how do we keep it simple? And that's what our plan was with Chargeway, was to say, well, if we can use simple colors to identify plug types that anybody can understand anywhere, and it translates into multiple languages, well, then we can use simple numbers to identify steps and stages of power, so they can quickly identify something either at a station, or they can quickly understand how their car is identified by power. And that, at a baseline, to your point, is how we can help people match up where and how they can charge, instead of having someone just say, well, 350 is the best, I want to use that one, just like premium's the best. There's more nuance to it. So
Yeah. And charging at this point is largely based on apps. Most people, when they need to locate a charger or find out more information about a specific charger, they're using the app to do that. When you pull into a stall, I mean, Electrify America is fairly good at putting, 150 or 350 or whatever on
yeah,
the stations themselves. But generally, when you're pulling in, you might not really know what you're getting into. And to your point about press releases, it continues. Most recently, this past week, 7-Eleven just announced they're going to build out a massive charging network, 7Charge. Read through the press release, read a couple articles that other people had written. Nowhere did anybody talk about charging speeds at all. They said, oh, the latest cars can charge, 10 to 80% in half hour, whatever the specific thing that they used. But I'm going, okay, well, they're not talking about a Chevy Bolt. So, all right. And then the only way I was able to even figure out what the speed is was by actually downloading the app, creating an account, logging into and checking the sites that are currently active. And it looks like every single one of them across the board right now, anyway, is 90 kilowatts.
Yep.
And I'm going,
well, the math doesn't work if you're telling people it'll take 30 minutes.
wait a minute.
Yeah. What I think what you're pointing to and what it speaks to is part of those who know this is complicated have two options, two choices, basically. They can talk about the complication or they can gloss over it. Because in the minds of the people that are working on the PR and the marketing side of it, and I've had many of these conversations, is their perception is, well, as marketers, we normally take information we get from a client, if we're talking about an agency, for example, and we take that information and we will create a campaign around it and we will distribute what they tell us they want us to distribute because they're paying us to do it. And that's no different for oftentimes in-house marketing teams as well, is they'll say, all right, well, what do we have to say? And they'll do their research as best they can. And I don't think this is malicious. It's just people are doing their best to do the homework and they just don't know what they don't know. And if they find information from, let's say, a manufacturer of the hardware that says this hardware has a capability of charging EVs in 30 minutes or something, they will just take that at face value and say, let's just put that in the press release. That sounds pretty good. And the problem is, again, it glosses over reality. And I would stretch to say that I'm one of the few people that has a marketing background that went into this space and said, I want to understand the engineering as best I can from both the automotive side and the energy side. And then once I learn all that, figure out how to translate it. Because I recognize we couldn't just keep throwing phrases at people, either by oversimplification, by saying, extreme or super, or by just saying 30 minutes, because it sets the consumers that are buying these products up for false expectations, and they will be very disappointed when they realize that, wait a minute, I used a 7-charge charger with my Mach-E, and it didn't take 30 minutes. It took like an hour and 15 to go from 10 to 80%. Why'd that happen? And then you go, well, to your point, there's this amp thing, there's this volt thing, there's your PAX voltage, and so our thought then is to say with Chargeway, and we're doing this right now with our software, is to say, can we do all that thinking in advance for them? Can we catalog and categorize stations within software and on a map, for example, knowing what the station's capabilities are, knowing what their car's capabilities are, and give them a tailored visualization on a map for what their experience will be? And the answer is yes, we're doing it now. And that's the challenge, though, is we're thinking about it that comprehensively, whereas a lot of these companies that are getting into this space, they are just making phone calls to partners, signing contracts, getting hardware in the ground and saying, well, how should we talk about this? Oh, this can do it in 30 minutes. That sounds fantastic. Let's put that in a press release. And people like you, myself, or others that know the details are looking at it saying, why did they not mention the power level here? And it's because either A, they didn't know, or B, they just looked at it and said, it's too complicated to explain. Let's just tell them it's 30 minutes.
All right. So I want to stop teasing the audience. Let's dive into what you guys at Chargeway have actually done and explain it step by step, because I truly believe that what you guys need to do, and this is me telling you how to run your business, so forgive me, but what Chargeway needs to do is to approach 7-Eleven or approach Starbucks, or maybe not the network operators themselves like EA, or ChargePoint or Blink, but or even Congress, honestly, to say, hey, we need to standardize the communication around this.
Yeah.
So obviously, I feel very strongly about this, and I know you obviously think the same. You would agree because you're doing it. So let's start off with the color system. You've got 3 different colors, right? Green, blue, and red. What do those represent?
So what we found was finding a way to identify the plug types quickly and easily in a way that average people can understand was very important. And colors is really great because number one is it's universal. People know what colors are. Number two is when you add the name of the color to any description you have, you can translate into multiple languages, which is great. But visually, it's something you can quickly, obviously, identify as well. So when we're talking about green plugs, that is the most widely used plug option, which is if we're talking engineering terminology, that is the J1772 connector for AC charging, as well as the CCS connector for DC charging. So those two connectors make up the green plug ecosystem. And that is what most EVs are using now. From a standardization perspective, that's what most automakers have now opted to use. And so that's starting with green. Blue, there are still many fast charging stations out there that offer CHAdeMO. And there are still many EVs on the road, such as the Leaf, which is still selling today, using CHAdeMO, as well as others, the previous, Kia EV Soul. There is the Mitsubishi Outlander and others that have used CHAdeMO. And those legacy stations and vehicles will be on the road for a long time. So drivers that buy those used, for example, in the future, and those stations that exist out there will still need to be maintained for that, for that ownership experience. So blue is CHAdeMO. And then for red, that's Tesla, because Tesla has their own plug type. And Tesla's plug works. The beauty of Tesla's plug, I think, is that it's very simple, it's streamlined, it's elegant, and it works both at home and away from home with the exact same size plug. And I think that's a very unique aspect to what they've built. But to that extent, by color, you can then identify quickly not only just a plug that might be at a station for you, but also what your car has on it. And that's a very important aspect. So if an owner buys a vehicle from a dealer and the dealer can say, your vehicle goes to green stations, you have a green plug on your vehicle, let us show you now what that looks like on a map for the vehicle you're buying, using our software in a dealership, for example. That's a very easy way to visualize my car's plugs and where they, what they are, and then where those stations are I can connect to. So that's the colors, was, giving a visual system to, can you connect? The next most important thing was, how long does it take to charge? and
yeah, because boy, is that a loaded question.
Yeah, right. So, and there's so many different pieces that can come into play around that. And what we found quickly is if you promise someone a kilowatt, in our research, we found if you say this, it's 150 kilowatt, the expectation from any driver is that is going to be 150 kilowatts.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting. And if they don't know what their car can accept, or if they're at a higher state of charge and they don't get 150, consumers will, if they get 146, they'll be like, is there something wrong with the charger? Huh? I mean, if you get people to focus so heavily on kilowatt that they can't allow for understanding around the fact that, if you plug in and it's giving you 145, your wait time is going to be basically identical to if it would have started at 150. Like, don't worry about that much. But people get very fixated on bigger, better, best. And so our goal with how to explain power was to say, all right, well, level 1 and 2 at home, we already use those terms pretty regularly. And that seems to be something that average people can quickly identify with. Level 1 is low power, level 2 is higher power at home. If I plug into a wall outlet, that's the level 1. That's going to take a long time. If I upgrade to a level 2, that's better. It still takes hours, but I can get an overnight charge at home and my car's sitting there for 8 or 10 hours. That's actually also pretty great. We just kept looking at it saying, okay, that's understandable to most people. Why are we trying to somehow come up with a different terminology for how fast charging works? And say, well, now you get to understand kilowatts. And so we said, let's just keep the level system going in a way that it compartmentalizes different experiences. So levels 3 through 7 in Chargeway denote fast charging, and levels 1 and 2 denote what we call standard charging, which is what you can do at home. And the goal of that was to say, how do we take the fast charging experience and get away from those types of phrases of 0 to 80% in 30 minutes and over-promising and under-delivering, and instead say, higher number means faster charging, and here's what these look like on a map. So instead of just showing people a map that has generic pins on it with lightning bolts, we can give people a visualization instead that's very true to what their experience would be. And we could say, here's all the green pins that you can connect to, and then you'll notice these numbers on those pins that identify the power level, the max power level at those stations. And they can say, oh, wow, it's not that all fast charging is fast charging. I do have to learn and understand these differences. And then matching that to what is the maximum power level your car can accept. So adding a number to the vehicle as well. So they can see that, well, my vehicle is a green level 6 vehicle. And I'm looking at this map, and at this shopping center, there is a green 4 station, a green 7 station, and a green 5 station. Well, I guess I could use the green 4, it'll take me longer. I could use the green 7, it's more power than my car can accept, but it's the best one there. Or maybe I could just use the green 5 because, well, I want to go to a movie. I don't need to be there I don't need to be in a hurry that much. We need to help people navigate that element of ownership experience so they can make those decisions in a way that's educated, but not feeling like we're teaching them is the idea. So that's the idea behind the numbers and the colors.
Yeah. So what you have created essentially is a simple, easy to understand system that translates the complexity and technical side of things to something that honestly kids can understand. Like a kindergartner could look at a color and look at a number and match them to the vehicle. You know,
Yeah.
if you have a Chevy Bolt with a B,
As in boy, yeah.
right? You know, okay, green, and then maybe it's and I forget the actual variation of levels for your fast charging.
And I can do that for everybody right now.
Yeah,
So
let's go through that, because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the Bolt at 55 kilowatt peak is a 4. Is that right?
Yeah. So the Bolt is right on this weird little cusp, right, where it's like right between what we would define as level 4 and level 5. So
Okay.
level 1 is your typical wall outlet, 1.5 kilowatts essentially at most. Level 2 goes all the way up to 19 kilowatts. At home, though, it is very rare you're going to use that much of your panel for a home
Like
charger.
80 amps. That's
Yeah,
a
it's
lot.
huge. Yeah, most on average, I think with EV battery size and home charging needs, we're probably going to see it balance out to probably around 10, 11 kilowatt. It'll be the average over time, more than likely. And then that goes up to 19. And then from 20 to 30 kilowatt, that's where we have level 3. Is saying, okay, that's your first step in fast charging. And there's plenty of charge point at Harley stations has 24 kilowatt DC fast chargers. A lot of Chevy dealers have 24, 25 kilowatt DC fast chargers. And these are denoted as fast chargers because they are. So that's that first step. And then level 4 would be up to 50 kilowatt. And that's your kind of your typical fast charger we've seen in the last 5 to 7 years through EVgo, ChargePoint, a variety of different options. And then from there, it's okay. Level 5 then is basically looking at anything that is going to be, around 51 to 100 kilowatts. And on average, this is a weird squishy area because the Bolt, for example, can go up to 55 kilowatt. But arguably speaking, those 1 to 5 kilowatts above 50, oftentimes that's for battery conditioning, things of that nature. So it doesn't really, if you were to plug into a 75 kilowatt charger or a 100 kilowatt charger, it's not going to do much for you, right? So we looked at that, and that's kind of an odd spot. But most chargers that are out there are going to be around 75 to 100 kilowatt in the level 5 range. And so vehicles that are in that level 5 category include like the Kia Niro EV maxes out at about 100 kilowatt. The Jaguar I-Pace, when it first came out, it maxed out at about 100 kilowatt. So that is in that ballpark of that level. And then level 6 is anything 101 to 200 kilowatt. Most vehicles and stations are going to land right around the 150 mark. There are some chargers that are around 125 kW. There are some that are around 160, 170. But this is where you start have to take into consideration charging curve. It's not about that max kW as much as when you connect, once you start to get to those high levels of kilowatt, does that 10 kilowatt difference that you're trying to denote on either a car or a charger really make that much of a difference? And the answer is no, not in the charging experience. It really doesn't. And so level 6, that's where a lot of vehicles and stations are right now. So that's between 100 and 200 kilowatt. And then 201 and up to 400 kilowatt, currently we have level 7. And that's all the 350 EA stations. That is anything that's Tesla, for example, everything they have for their latest versions of superchargers, those are level 7 chargers. Those vehicles that are out there that are level 7 capable, like the Teslas that are out there, the Porsche Taycan, the Lucid Air, anything that is the Kia EV6, the Hyundai Ioniq 5, these are all level 7 capable cars. Now the fun part is some of those are 400 volt vehicles and some of those are 800 plus volt vehicles.
But I just wrote down.
Yep. And so that's one of the things that we looked at Chargeway. We said, do we need to keep chipping away at getting people to understand voltage, or if we know the math on the vehicle and we know the math on the station, could we have a dynamic software solution in our app that if you're using a Lucid, for example, you will see that nope, that charger there is going to give me level 7 power because my 800 volt vehicle is matched up to that station well. But if I'm using a 400 volt vehicle, can we instead denote that it's going to be a lower power level because we know what the car they're driving? The answer is yes. And especially we know what the hardware is doing, whether that's the voltage of the station or maybe the coupler, the connector itself, or what amperage it can max out at. So we do all of that thinking in advance for people. And I think the best example of that right now is if you're looking at even Magic Dock, when Tesla
Yeah.
unveiled that recently, is we had people that were pulling up to it. When I say we, I mean the industry and owners.
Yes.
They had Ionic 5s and EV6s, and they're pulling up, backing in, plugging in. They're going, I'm only getting like 45 kilowatt. Like, what's going on? And it's because of the 800-volt architecture of that battery pack. And so we looked at that and said, okay, well, we know that if you're driving this vehicle and you pull up to a supercharger with Magic Dock, we're not going to show you a green level 6. It's not going to be 150 kilowatt.
Right.
No, this is a green level 4 for you. So, yep, it's green, you can connect, but frankly, it's only going to give you level 4 power. So it might be neat that you're at a supercharger, but frankly, there might be an Electrify America station or an EVgo station across the street that would frankly be a better experience for you by sake of power. And we do all of that math for people when they look at the map based on the car they've selected. So that's a big part of what we focused on.
I want to highlight that because the user experience, what they actually see, is on, you can go to the web page and you've got a map that you can use on the web page. You have an app for the phone where I think most people probably use that. We'll get to the kiosks in the dealerships in a little bit because I definitely want to touch on that before we end. But what you're telling me is that depending on the vehicle that people put in, they might see different results on the map.
Correct. And that's because it's not based on here's charging that is offering 150 kilowatt. There is all these details of the math behind the scenes that each driver is going to need to know for their particular use case. And at Chargeway, we recognize that from day one. It was not about charging existing and putting pins on a map. It was about what is your personal experience as a driver, and that's what you want to know. So, for example, if you add a Chevrolet Volt, V as in Victor, that is a plug-in hybrid vehicle that can only use standard charging, we don't even show you fast chargers on the map. We don't even give you the option to see them. We just say this is where your charging landscape is, because that's part of the learning curve. If people just think that charging is charging and then they have to weed through all the chaos on their own terms, that will really frustrate a lot of the public. And we're trying to avoid all that.
So that might be one of the most important things that you all have done. And the reason I say that is because I have actually recently, I was approached by a company that they were developing a phone app and online map that's searchable, that similar to PlugShare, where people can rate the stations, but they're pulling all of their data from the Alternative Data Fuel Center. So they have all of these. And when they first reached out to me, they had everything out there. There was no determination of what the speed was. You couldn't sort it and organize the information. It was not very user-friendly. So I made some suggestions. I said, look, if you guys are going to do this, here's your competition, and I mentioned you guys. I mentioned, Electrify America, EVgo, ChargePoint, the main PlugShare, a better route planner, the apps that are out there to help people find chargers and identify them. But the user still needs to know their own vehicle, what plug they have, what it's capable of, and then they still need to sort and filter through all of the results going, if you go on to PlugShare, you see like 20 different plug types almost. I mean, it's not 20, but it's like, okay, well, which one is my car? Okay, well, it's actually 2, the J1772 plus, whatever else. And I'm going, that still requires the user to have a fairly, I'm going to call it advanced, even though for you or me, it's just, every day. But it still requires them to have this knowledge that they just don't have right now. And it might be 30 years before we get to a point where this is common knowledge. I mean, people in the industry still confuse terms. And these are people that work daily in this industry. And I'm going, come on, really?
If I had a nickel for every time I've seen kilowatt and kilowatt hour, if I had a nickel for every time I've seen those confused by people that are in the industry.
I'm throwing a third one in there, kilowatt hour per hour.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean,
you can't always charge by time, right?
So if we in the industry collectively, not you or me, If we can't get it right all of the time, how can we possibly expect somebody else to learn and apply that on a consistent, regular basis and never get it wrong? Because
Yeah,
if you are in an EV on a road trip, you can't get it wrong because that
that's right.
affects things. It either affects the amount of time that you're taking, and I'm sure you and I both seen plenty of reports of, oh, I just bought an EV and I went on a road trip and it took 4 times as long to do than it was supposed to. What's going on?
Yeah.
You guys, the solution that you have is so unique in that you don't really have to learn all of that anymore.
Well, no,
Oh,
and you just said it very well. It's not about learning; it's about showing,
yeah,
right? Don't
yeah,
tell me, show me, right? And I think the example you just gave too about a lot of recently, especially, there's been a lot of journalists who have taken EV road trips and who have said, gosh, this did not go as planned, and here's the reasons why, and here's what I fell into. And then I will look at some of the resources they use to go on the road trip, and I'll just read what they wrote. I'll think, well, yeah, because the resources you were using were not really clarifying to you how to use fast charging. They were just saying, here's a fast charger, and they would go use it.
yep,
And I think that that's part of the communication challenge is what we're focused on, is saying people do need to know the differences. And one of the things that we focused on with our mobile app and with our software platform, especially, was not just the station map of where you can find all these chargers for just your car, but also having a robust trip planner. And that's something that a lot of folks, and we're getting more and more people that are contacting us saying, I love the fact that your trip planner is actually easy to use. I don't have to enter in the headwind and all these other
right.
different little weird things. I can say, here's the speed I'm going to set for cruise control. It is currently 58 degrees outside. I'm going from here to here. Give me what I need. And it does all of it, just like we did on the station map. We do all of the thinking for you on the trip planner. So it shows you your suggested stops based on your vehicle, the speed you're driving, the temperature outside, the algorithms we have take into consideration all those different things about elevation, so that you will have an experience that doesn't push you to the limit of comfort. The idea is to give you the best experience for just ownership. And there's a lot of different ways we can customize that, but at a minimum, it gives people visibility into, here's what works for my car, and here's how I can trust what works for my car on a trip, and basically give people the X's and O's of how to use charging, to your point, without having to get too far into the weeds. And they just kind of say, well, you showed me how it works, and I went and did it, and it worked that way. It was great. So yeah,
Figure. Yeah,
yeah,
I
go
mean,
figure.
it it's sad that the current environment for EVs and their relationship to the fueling, the charging, it's sad that something as so simple is making such a big difference for people. The actual user experience, when people get into their car, they don't want to think about how it works. They just want it to work. Same
Right.
thing is with charging. They don't
Yeah,
want to think about how it works. They just want to plug in and have it work as advertised. To your point
yeah,
about seeing a number, that's the number they're looking for always.
yeah,
I mean, it anybody can go on the forums or Facebook groups and see countless experiences that people had that they're going, well, why is it not doing this? Or
yeah,
why am I only limited to that? Education is, well, first of all, it's the reason I started EV Resource, but it is
mhm,
the biggest challenge for this adoption of, to your point, not new vehicles, new fuel types.
yeah, yeah,
Like, we're
truly.
still driving cars. We're still using them in many of the same ways. I mean, there are some exceptions with like Vita G or Vita X stuff. Like,
Mhm.
okay, we can do more with these, but the basic purpose of transportation hasn't changed.
Yeah, actually,
So
no, that's a very important point. And honestly, a lot of conversations I've had over the years of operating Chargeway is just that. Is saying to people, we've been very focused on, we as an industry, I think, spent a lot of time trying to differentiate EVs and saying they were different. And I think, it came back and bit us, because people are naturally nervous about change, and so if you go out of your way to emphasize that it's different, that's going to make people scared.
yeah,
So instead, if you can say, actually, this is just a car.
we don't need to be new and exciting anymore. And every manufacturer that even now is coming out with their first or maybe their second EV, they're still going, hey, this is shiny, it's special, and I'm going to throw GM into the mix. And I love a lot about them, but their talk is so big. Oh, this electric and this electric and this electric. And I'm going, I'm an EV guy, but honestly, who cares? It's a car or it's an SUV or it's a truck.
Yeah.
I don't want EVs to be special anymore. And I know that sounds kind of funny, but it's like, it's just normal. This is just normal. The fueling, certainly not normal.
Yeah, the fueling is so. It's funny you bring that up because there was that campaign that was done by Veloz and Electrify America, Normal Now campaign.
Yep.
And I remember when I first saw that, and I thought, as a marketer, my gut reaction to that was, if you have to say that to somebody, they're immediately going to think the opposite.
Right.
Like they're going to go, you're trying to convince me of this, and I don't buy it. And
Yep.
I think that's part of the issue that we still face as an industry, is that there is this very large disconnect between communication professionals and those who are very good at helping translate a lot of this. They have oftentimes not been at the table when a lot of these decisions have been made for what's the strategy? How are we moving this industry forward? I think one of the best examples, frankly, and we hear this from dealerships all the time that we work with, is they will say, can you guys explain MPGE to us? And we always tell them, no. Nope. And don't bother telling your customer because it will only confuse them. Yep. And they said, yeah, that's the problem we face, is that they'll see that gigantic MPGE number on the window sticker and they'll say, well, wait a minute, so this thing only has 110 miles of range? No, that's the MPGE. And they'll say, okay, so it takes gas? No, it doesn't take gas. It's the equivalent of what you might have gotten if this was a gas car. It is the absolute, in the world of communication, I would be willing to bet it's one of the, if not the worst, communication strategy ever, because it does nothing for no one. A driver wants to know, how far does this thing actually go? Where do I fill it up? And how can I trust it as a car? If you're trying to give me an equivalent equation to make me feel warm and fuzzy about the efficiency of this thing, I've got two words for you. Stop it. I don't care as a consumer. I just want to know, does it work? And the dealers we've talked to have said, look, your solution has helped us translate a lot of what we used to not be able to translate in a way that's effective to help us make our customers feel confident about buying EVs. And that's the point.
Yes.
So
I am agreeing with most of what you just said, but I'm going to challenge one small part that
okay.
I have started to think a lot about, actually, the communication of how we're talking to people about electric vehicles. I do a lot of auto shows where I'll walk around, and if somebody's looking at, maybe the Audi sitting over there, and I'll just kind of listen and
what are they saying? Yeah.
Maybe I'll just chime in. Too much, probably, but and people constantly, one of the biggest questions is range. How far will it go?
Yeah.
And right now, and also previously, we've had to talk about that, because you can't go from point A to point B without knowing that there is a charger there, first of all, and that it'll work. And I won't get into the working aspect, but I really think that we do need to focus on talking about the energy efficiency of EVs, not using miles per gallon equivalent, because agreed, that is stupid.
Like NPK, like miles per kilowatt hour would be great.
Or something, and focus on that, because as the infrastructure gets built out, the experience will be less of planning the trip to know that I can get to where I'm going and there's chargers along the way, to, well, there's chargers everywhere. I'll just stop it whenever I need one. Same as we do with our gas vehicles. We get low, we recharge.
Yeah.
That's where we're going. And I think one of the biggest factors that's actually prohibiting a faster adoption of electric vehicles is this constant focus about range. Because most people don't drive that far.
Range
on a daily basis.
Deal. Yeah.
Most people drive 40 miles or less per day. If you have a car that has a 50 kilowatt hour battery, you could go multiple days without recharging, obviously, depending on variables. Yeah. So range, yes, I think we're kind of at this cusp where we need to start not talking about range and instead talk about how efficient is this vehicle.
Mhm.
We need to stop talking about range because it, it's limiting. It gives
Well,
people this idea that I can't go further than that. Well, of course you can. You just refuel.
yeah. Well, no, that's a great point, and I think what you're hitting on too is, and this is there's a few other people I talk in the industry about that kind of bring up what you're saying, and they've started to conclude, well, the phrase range anxiety has been such a catchphrase for people having concern, or however you want to talk about it, for a long time. And what I finally started pointing to is, I said it's not that they have range anxiety as much as they have fuel anxiety,
Yes.
because
Yes.
they don't drive perpetual motion machines right now. like
Right.
a brand new Mustang, a gas powered Mustang GT gets like 250 miles to a tank.
Right.
I mean, so no one buying that car has concerns about range.
And nobody's talking about it either.
And no one's talking about it because
Never.
they know that the landscape of refueling is simple, reliable, and easy to find.
Yep.
And so then, if that's why they trust a gas powered car so well, that's how they will, to your point, over time will build out enough infrastructure that they will feel more confident. That's the goal, right? But one of the other issues that we still face is that, and we saw this in our focus groups, is we would have people say to us, when I'm driving my truck or my Mustang, if I'm driving down the freeway and I'm in the middle of Oregon, where we're based, and I can see a gigantic yellow shell a mile down the road, and I know that I'm okay with either vehicle I'm driving, and I don't. And the person that gave us this comment, they said, I don't have any sense or visibility around what you're trying to explain when it comes to not using gas but using electricity. And so we can drop in tens of thousands of charging stations, but if we're not creating high visibility around where they are and how they work, that's a problem. And actually, California discovered this. UC Davis did a study in 2017, and they asked prospective customers of EVs. They said, do you think there's enough charging infrastructure out there for you to buy an EV today and you'd be confident? And a certain amount of people said yes, a certain amount of people said no. And in a period of, I think it was 3 or 4 years, the amount of public charging stations in California doubled. And UC Davis did the study again. And they said,
change.
hey,
I'm sure.
we're worse than no change. The amount of people that said they didn't think there was enough public infrastructure also doubled.
Wow.
So California added all these new chargers, and the amount of people from the public that said there's enough went from X% said I don't think there's enough to double that number 4 years later. That's how many people said there's not. So what does that say? We can keep building infrastructure till we're blue in the face, but if we don't have a strategy around helping people understand it, where it is, and how it works, then we are really causing our own problems. And I got to be honest, to the state of California, I love how progressive you are in a lot of ways, but when I've driven down I-5 and I see a gigantic blue sign that's the size of the side of a house, and it says fuel or gas, and a gigantic chevron sign, and then below that on the wooden post, there's a little tiny sign that says EV.
They actually still have a sign though. Anywhere else, I have never been anywhere driving along interstates where I've seen a sign that indicates that there's a charger available at that exit.
Oh no, it's way worse everywhere else. By the sake of the fact there's no signage. But when the signage is basically a flea,
just a small little.
On the back of a dog, and you go like, well, hey, we have a problem here. So this is an example of there are not proper communication professionals in the room when these decisions are being made by industry. And so we've covered MPGE, we've talked about signage on the highways, we've talked about studies from well-known universities in the realm of transportation like UC Davis just now. The evidence is in, the data is there. We have to do a better job with communication.
Yep. So that highlights a few issues that Chargeway can't address directly, at least from an outsider's perspective. Because obviously you might be able to influence other people making decisions, but you can't necessarily just add, stickers to the signs.
No, those would be some huge stickers. But we have added. So to your point about stickers, we've labeled now about 5,000 charging stations in the U.S. in partnership with our utility partners that we work with. So we're talking about Texas, we're talking about California, we're talking about Oregon, and so that's the last breadcrumb. Is if you give someone a digital wayfinding system and then they walk up to a charging station that's a different shape from the last one they saw, that adds confusion. But if they see a gigantic green 6 staring at them, and then the one next to it is a green 7, and they go, oh, my car's a green 6 car, I'll just grab the 6. That is how you visually communicate an educational system from digital to reality.
Yes. So I applaud the effort and the work that you guys are doing to make that side of it easy. But and honestly, if that were all that you guys had done is just develop a system without applying it anywhere and working through getting partnerships and permissions to apply that to the infrastructure, that would be enough. We've talked about the web page, we've talked about the app, and I've showed people that a big part of this educational need is at the time of purchase. Let's face it, when people are shopping for a car, that's when they're thinking about all of these things. And certainly when salespeople and dealerships have to communicate about how to fuel a vehicle now, where they've never, ever, ever had to do that across the last 150 years or so.
Right.
So, what is it that you guys have done to help dealerships communicate this change in fuel type to their customers?
Well, what we developed from the outset with Chargeway was it was designed to be a system. And the first idea about the system was the colors and the numbers to make it a holistic and agnostic solution that could work for any network, any driver, any dealership, any brand, anywhere. So we just applied that same methodology to the software. And we said, okay, well, if we're going to have a web platform that can be embedded into dealership websites, if we're going to have a mobile app that consumers can download, we need to think about the customer journey in a way of what other touch points do we need to provide this into that not only provides customers and drivers and buyers that information, but also how do we help industry? And a big part of that was in the dealership showroom. We hear it all the time that there's not enough people that are in showrooms that understand EVs that can talk about it, eloquently or with any expertise. And so we thought we can apply our software platform not through a mobile app, but through a 6-foot tall touchscreen kiosk, which we call the Beacon, and it not only creates an interactive interface that is designed to provide the dealers answers to questions they will see, but it also creates consistency throughout the journey for someone who's in the car buying experience. They will see the same interface and information online. They will see it when they download it to their pocket, and they'll see it when they're in the showroom. And consistency with messaging matters when you're trying to help people feel confident about something. And so the Beacon was designed to translate everything you have in your pocket for the Chargeway mobile app into a showroom to give that as a resource to the dealers in a buying experience in a showroom setting. And so when you're looking at the Chargeway Beacon, it has everything about the station information you need. It has the charge time estimator to educate people on power levels and charge time. It has the trip planner, but it also has incentive data as well. And it's all tailored to the brand that the showroom sells. It's not, here's information on everything. We say, if this is a Volkswagen showroom, this is going to have information on the ID4, all trim levels. And when you choose a trim level, that's what you're going to see on the map. And that's what you're going to see for road trip plan. And that's what you're going to see for incentives. And we found that the dealers all said the same thing, which was, we're really good at explaining the value of our brand. We can say to people why Chevy is great, why Ford is great, why Mercedes is great, why Hyundai is great. And we've got a lot of great things that the manufacturer helps us talk about. But the manufacturer, as we've talked about today, they are not experts in discussing, we've never had to discuss fueling, but not only that, they're not experts in how to communicate energy. So what do we do here? And so the resource of the Beacon is all the things that exist for the driver's needs is also for the dealer's needs. And it's a really great way to give them not only a tool they can use to sell, but also it's a great way to train them. And so we've really found that once a Beacon is deployed into a showroom, they have this third-party resource that's always there. And because and it's always talked about the rollover we have for staffing at dealers in America, 50% of the staff might be gone every 6 months and new people might be in. We've had dealers say to us, well, because we've got the Beacon, it's this sales associate that won't quit that happens to be an EV expert. So when we bring in the new people, we'll say, hey, by the way, check out this solution. We'll show you how stations work. We'll show you how charging power works. We'll show you how trip plan works. Oh, and it has incentive data too. It is this ongoing resource that they can continue to leverage even after we've deployed it. And so I think what we're showing there is the Chargeway platform is designed to be that glue between the automotive and the energy sectors on how they can communicate the value of the vehicle and the value of the fuel. And when we do our trainings with dealerships, the thing that we advise them on is you will encounter two types of buyers right now, essentially, and probably perpetually. Is there's going to be the EV early adopter that pre-educated. They will walk in here and talk circles around you about the technology. You're just going to want to ask them what color car they want.
Right.
like that's, they've already sold themselves. And every time we do trainings on this, you see the sales reps nodding their head going, oh yeah, we know who those people are. But that person who lives on a cul-de-sac in a suburban area that buys that car has 20 neighbors that aren't like them, that might say, whoa, like that's that new Volkswagen or that's that new Hyundai or whatever. And then they might go in to do a test drive or ask a question, not having any of the same background. And so the other type of buyer is that curious buyer who is going to need to be walked through a lot of things that other person pre-educated on. And the EV industry to date has been built upon people relying on consumers pre-educating.
People are just going to buy that car because of all the reasons they've ever bought a car.
Yep.
The fact that it's electric or gas is going to become less and less important, except for everything that we've talked about, making it, and I'm going to use your words, I wrote it down because this is gold. So
okay.
simple, reliable, and easy to find. Solve that. Nothing else matters to the majority of people. I do have one very specific question that I have no idea how else to tie it in. So forgive me if it changes the subject directly. I don't know the answer to this. Do you guys on your app map, the data that you're collecting on the network of fast chargers and standard chargers that are out there, do you have live updates where if a station is not working, somebody will know that?
So for eight, I believe it's 8 or 9 of the top major networks, we do have station on or offline now showing in the Chargeway mobile app.
Cool. Okay.
So if you are, so then that means that the entire station is down.
Right.
And so the data that the different networks provide out, as you found out, even that one company you talked about, you got to get a little bit more granular on what you're showing. Is there is always the interest of, is the charger in use or is it available? We're adding details around that currently. Yeah. But if we know a station is fully offline and down, we will mark it as offline. So the pin on the map will turn gray. And if you tap it, it will above the pin say station offline. And if we know that data about that station, when you're routing a trip plan, we will not route the car through offline stations. Okay. There is better information than there was even a couple of years ago around a station being fully online or station being offline. But to your point about individual charger issues, yeah, that is still going to be an ongoing issue because their software doesn't necessarily let them know, to your point, is the lock on the top of the connector broken? And therefore it cannot connect correctly to the car. Yep. Is the screen on or off? I mean, there's little things like that impact the customer experience that they do not yet have that level of detail about information about how the charger might be working. We do get reviews and reports all the time through users of Chargeway, so you can leave a rating on a station, just a star rating system. Yep. But we also have the capability for users in the mobile app to report issues directly from the app. You can be at a station, and if there's a problem with a particular charger, you simply click on the report issue button. It automatically populates an email that goes directly to the customer service team from that network. It tells them in the subject line the name of the station. It says report problem. It has the address, and then you can just add in charger 2 has a broken connector, whatever you want to do. And so we have the reporting of problems of stations have become more of a conversation lately, especially. Yeah. And we've had that part of our app has been functional now for a couple of years, and we're seeing it used more and more now that people are recognizing they can have an influence on the networks.
Yes. So yeah, give feedback, because compared to gas stations, well, there aren't that I know of, unless you're talking like with a fleet fueling. Mm-hmm. For public fueling stations, there's usually a human being there. If there's a problem, they know about it basically immediately and can contact somebody to come fix it within the day or two. So with EV chargers, of course, at the corner of a parking lot, far away from anybody and anything, like that information isn't widely known.
That's you're keying on something I think is very important about where things will go in the future for EV charging infrastructure. Is the business model of public infrastructure right now is not designed around oversight and ownership.
Right.
is it really is kind of a handoff.
Yeah.
Is the networks that are offering up software and hardware solutions that are being purchased by utilities and municipalities and states and you name it, their approach is we provide you the hardware and the software, but you got to keep an eye on that hardware. If it's got a problem, you got to tell us. We're not keeping an eye on it. And that, I think that's going to continue to cause a problem for the ownership and customer experience for charging for EV owners, is because if a particular network does not have an incentive for oversight, and if it's not well translated to whoever their partner is that bought the hardware to maintain the oversight, that falls on the drivers to let people know there's a
Yep.
problem. And that is not a good customer experience. So,
No, no. And having a way to make it very easy to give feedback
yep.
on a very specific situation, I think there's value to that that goes much further than just the immediate user experience, because
Mhm.
that will help shape protocol and standards that come down the road
Yeah.
for addressing situations like that. I know a lot of my audience are early adopters, but
Mhm.
beyond that, they are EV evangelists, where they are just like me and just like
I'm one
you.
too. Yeah.
We we just want to make the world a better place. We want to
Mhm.
make this easy. We want to see more EVs on the road for various reasons, whether it be environmental or otherwise. Like, what I love about the EV community is that as it's growing larger, there's still so much desire for collaboration, where this feeling that we're all working in different areas, but we have the same mission of just
Yeah.
moving this forward. For those people that are watching and listening to this, what can they do to help really craft the change of almost standardizing the Chargeway system and
Mhm.
incorporating that into signage, into policy, honestly, because I
Yeah.
think at a certain point we need a national standard for talking about charging.
Yeah.
So, what can people do to kind of accelerate the mission, but use Chargeway as to highlight that this tool, this standard is there? When I'm driving down the highway, I want to see next to Chevron or Shell or Exxon, I want to see, we'll say EV Go, Green 6.
Well, I think one of the challenges we've run into with Chargeway, especially too, is that we are thinking differently than many other early adopters were when they bought their EVs. And we've had a lot of conversations with EV owners who are very steeped in the engineering and they understand the details. And we will be explaining to them, no, this is what our platform does, and they'll say, but no, everybody just needs to learn what I did. And I think one of the biggest things we invite people to do is to say, just we didn't design Chargeway to replicate other apps out there. Like, we didn't design it to replicate PlugShare. We didn't design it to replicate a better route planner. We designed it to be a different way of visualizing and thinking of this, to give excited EV owners and evangelists a better tool to talk to their friends, to talk to their neighbors, to talk to people about saying, hey, look, you may not think like me, but here's a tool that might help you understand why I love this.
Right.
That's where I invite people to just download it and give it a shot and understand the differences between what they may have used before and how this might help them with conversations. And to your point, that could be a conversation with a policymaker. And we talk to people all the time that are in state and federal level from a policy side, and they also do not know as much as we do as enthusiasts. They take things at face value. They might be talking to a lobbyist from a network, so they may not know these little details about serving the public on a more broad scale in a more holistic way. And so this is, I think, would be an opportunity to even have those conversations as well. If anybody knows those types of people, to say, actually, this is something you should be thinking about as a policymaker. And here's an app you can download to get a sense of what we're talking about. I think oftentimes, we're still, again, so early in this conversation, is we designed our platform to be kind of at the chasm. It was designed to be that bridge between the early adopters and the early majority.
Yeah.
And the way we're going to grow that smoothly is with more advocacy. And we're not trying to take away from anything that other people have already done. We're trying to build upon that to make it easier for more people to fall in love with EVs.
Amen. I mean, shoot, we can end on that.
Well,
No,
perfect.
we could probably continue for hours, but I
Yeah.
want to be respectful not only to your time, but also to anybody that might be watching or listening to this. The longer it goes, the less people are going to make it to the end and hear all of the really great stuff. We've covered a lot, and I think that's
Yeah.
good. And if we want to cover other stuff, we can be more specific and maybe follow up with a second a second episode on that.
Sure.
If people want to get involved more as an activist, or at the very least, just follow what innovations Chargeway is doing, what's the best way for them to just kind of keep tabs on how you all are going along with things?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, everything for social media we have is just Chargeway as a username. So that's on Instagram, that's on Twitter, that's on Facebook, that's on LinkedIn as well. Obviously, chargeway.net is our website. If you have an interest in finding out more details about what we're working on, you can go there. You can contact us directly through there, whether you're a driver or you represent a utility or a city or an automaker, whatever it might be, you can reach out to us that way. And then obviously on the App Store, on both iOS and Android, you can download the Chargeway mobile app for free, and you can add what your current EV. You can add as many EVs as you want to your account to see how our platform works for those different types of vehicles you might be looking at. And I really invite everybody listening to just give the platform a shot and think about what you had to learn. If you're an EV owner now, what did you have to go through to learn to get to the place where you feel confident? And think about what our platform is providing, from station finding that's dedicated to the vehicle you've selected. It identifies easily, you can connect with color for plug type. It identifies easily with power level that you know what's waiting for you at a station. It has a charge time estimator to help you learn how charging works between standard charging at home for 1 and 2 or fast charging away from home, levels 3 to 7. And it has a trip planner that does all the thinking for you. Use all those tools and then maybe think about, wow, does this cover maybe not everything just yet, but man, a lot of what I had to learn. And then think about how that might help you in your conversations with your friends and family and neighbors about why EVs are so great, and leverage it that way.
Awesome. Well, Matt, I want to thank you absolutely for coming on. Like I said, I don't know why we didn't do this, a year ago, even.
Yeah.
Like as I was starting to think about it, going, wait a minute, I talk about Chargeway a lot to people. Why hasn't this happened yet? So,
Well, I appreciate the invite. I've loved this conversation. This has been great.
before I get into the ending announcements and the question of the week and all of that I definitely want to include in this episode for you all, I want to thank Matt again and just encourage all of you to, like he said, download the app and check it out and share the different way of talking about EVs and EV charging with other people. One of the biggest issues that we are going to have as we transition to the early majority adopters is people that are just buying EVs and they don't know, I don't want to say anything, but they really don't know the lingo and the technology, and it's foreign. It's not something that they're going to be familiar with. This makes it so that they don't really have to learn all of the details, because that just really takes a long time, and many people are not going to want to learn that at all. So utilize this, leverage what Chargeway has built to really go out there and further EV adoption, because we need to do that. Like, we need more EVs on the road for a number of reasons. I guess I really don't know what else to say about that. I mean, obviously you can tell I'm very passionate about changing the way we're talking about this. I believe that Chargeway, as I've said many times, even in this episode, has really, really narrowed it down to just the basics of what needs to be communicated without filling somebody's mind with all of the other things that can get confusing. So I'm going to take a quick break. I will be back. We'll take care of the question of the week and all of the ending announcements right after this.
Do you own a business and want to reach EV owners and people interested in electric vehicles? EV Resource is welcoming businesses nationwide, both big and small, to become advertising partners with us across all platforms. The EV Resource podcast, magazine, YouTube videos, social media, and our webpage. For more information, please email Zach at hello@ev-resource.com.
All right, on then to the question of the week. Last week, I had asked you all, when traveling on longer road trips, what are the important things that will impact whether the trip is a success or not in your mind? Is it going to be minimal overall time stopped compared to time driving, minimal amount of stops altogether, going as fast as safely possible when driving? Actually, that one doesn't even make sense. Being as comfortable as possible, being relaxed and alert. What is important when you're doing that? So Ethan B said, quote, "The most important to me is, out of all the options listed, is minimal amount of stops altogether. Honestly, driving is not my favorite thing to do, so I prefer to stop as little as possible so I can get to my destination quicker. Normally, when I stop to charge, I use the bathroom, grab something quick to eat, and consume it while driving to my destination." So Ethan, actually, before I continue with everybody else's answers, I want to actually say this to everybody, but also directly to you, because I know you listen all the time. Actually, on road trips with an EV, charging longer into the state of charge, so at higher state of charge with many EVs, actually requires more time, even though it's less stops, where the quickest way to achieve, your destination would actually be to stop more, but stop when you're around 10% state of charge and charge maybe to 45 or 50%, and then get back on the road and stop again sooner. So you end up stopping more often, but the total amount of time charging is less. And that's because pretty much all EVs on that lower state of charge are going to have a much higher rate of charge. So you're charging more quickly, getting those miles recouped more quickly, and then continuing on your way, where 50 to 80% and then above 80% especially takes a very long time, because the state of, or the rate of the charge current is reduced so much. So it actually takes longer. I know that's kind of counterintuitive, but it is something that I have experienced myself. There are also many accounts of other people going on road trips with EVs that can back that up as well. Andy Cooper said, quote, "We're planning a trip to Santa Fe, New Mexico to visit the west of the country for a while. Overall, our goal would be to minimize the number of stops altogether, and by the nature of EVs, we'll also accomplish a secondary objective of being relaxed and alert by stopping every 100 to 170 miles at a time." And he had some additional thoughts. He's saying that the car and driver report that I had mentioned had a GV70 Genesis range calculated, which is a real confidence boost since his GV60 has the same exact powertrain. Looking at the ABRP, or a Better Route Planner, which is an app that will help you route plan, not to take anything away from Chargeway. I know this is kind of awkward with this episode, but maybe, Andy, I just haven't talked about Chargeway enough with you. But he did say that he plans to have 1450 extension cable. So that's a 240 volt, 4-pin, 50 amp cable. Once again, charging gets complicated. If you're not an early adopter, this stuff we shouldn't have to worry about it. And Andy's going to get a number of various charging adapters from various plugs to the 1450, so that he's ready for any scenario if there's not an available charger, fast charger close by. Christopher Lawrence said, quote, "My number one is safety while charging. Well lit, high traffic areas. My traveling companion has a high bar for what she considers a sketchy area." And John Hurst said, "None of the above. It's a success if I get there when I was planning to get there. And EV charging is what God invented the smartphone for." So the question of the week this week is actually going to be somewhat of the opposite look at EV usage, where road trips are going to be the exception to the rule. This week, I want to ask you about your normal day-to-day usage. How many miles do you typically drive on a single day, on average, and how do you usually charge your car? Or for those of you who do not have EVs yet, how many miles do you typically drive every day, and how often do you end up filling up with gasoline or diesel? So as always, I will have the question pinned at the top of the Patreon page. You can access that by going to patreon.com/EVResource. You don't have to be a Patreon supporter in order to participate. This is one of the things that is open to the public. All right, so before I end for this week, I do have a couple of announcements. And as always, I like to start this part with thanking the Patreon supporters that really are quite generous, especially in times where I am not holding up my end of the bargain, or at least as I see it. As I've mentioned, things have gotten really, really busy, and it actually pains me that I'm not getting this out there on a regular weekly basis like I should. So I have extra thanks because those of you who are sticking around and especially supporting me with, your financial ability, it means a lot. So at the director tier, we've got Rajiv Narayan, Andy Cooper, and Ethan B. Then at the executive producer tier, Christopher Lawrence. And I know I only do it usually once a month, but because it's been a while, I feel like I owe the credit to these guys as well. At the producer tier, I've got Alan Michael, Bruce Galat, Charles Hall, and Eric Weber. So all of them, thank you very much. Those of you who are listening to the podcast on a regular basis when I'm putting it out there on a regular basis, I want to thank all of you as well. I am not going to ask for any additional support because honestly, at this point, I don't feel like I've earned it. If you disagree and somehow do feel like I've earned your support, then I'm not going to stop you. You can head over to patreon.com and take a look at the different tiers. There are additional benefits associated with each tier, and they stack the higher you go. If you are in the market for EV accessories, toys, games, books, all of those things, and you're going to buy them anyway, I would definitely appreciate it if you went through my referral links on the EV Resource page. So that's under the shop section. And then under the sponsor section on the webpage, it's actually ev-resource.com/deals. I do have a lot of deals, coupon codes, and various affiliate connections that are willing to extend special offers to the audience just because they're willing to support the show when somebody is purchasing through that link. So if you're thinking about buying things anyway, and it doesn't take too much for you, go ahead and check that out. Okay, and also I had announced that I was going to do a bonus Zoom call for everybody. Anybody that is listening to the podcast or watching on YouTube, or honestly, anybody at all, if you have friends that would be interested in this topic. The poll, there's 4 different topics that I had put on there. What's your favorite new EV coming by the end of 2023? Thoughts about the, North American Charging Standard, or NACS, robo-taxis, or currently the one that has the most amount of votes, 75%, is EVs plus solar plus battery backup, which is a great topic choice. So if I'm going to leave the poll up so you guys can continue to vote between now and when the date is going to be. If you're interested in, either of those topics, feel free. Honestly, I love the idea of really where it is, the EVs plus solar plus battery backup. That's really exciting and something I would love to chat with you all about. So the way it's going to work, basically, assuming we're going to have a decent amount of people, we're going to kind of structure things a little bit more formally and stay muted and then raise your hand if somebody wants to talk or chat or whatnot, just so that I can kind of moderate things a little bit. But the date is going to be Sunday, August 6th at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So if you're somewhere else in the world, adjust accordingly. I have the Zoom invite link in a comment on the post, which is on Patreon. I actually put that post there July 4th. So if you're looking for it, you can find it based on the date. The title of that is Bonus Zoom Chat for Entire EV Resource Audience. So if you listened at the very end of episode 159, kind of like the end of this episode, and you're one of the people that is sticking around and, actually listening, then I want to reward you for that. And this is just one way of doing that. So as a thank you, I would love to see your face and let's talk. talk some EV stuff. And if in this case, if it stays this way, EVs and solar and battery backup and how all of that kind of works together. So that will be fun. If you have a comment, question, or complaint or concern, because certainly I wouldn't be surprised if there were a couple of those, you can email me, hello@ev-resource.com. I read all of the emails, and actually I have been a lot better at checking that on a regular basis. So even though I haven't had the podcast out every single week the last few weeks, I am checking the emails, and if you send me something, I'll definitely respond. So I want to thank you all very, very much for watching and listening. And as always, I'll catch you next time.